Philosophers often argue about whether reality is ultimately one or many. At first, this sounds like a distant metaphysical puzzle, but William James treats it as a question with practical consequences. Consequences for how we interpret experience, how we think about truth, and even how we understand conflict, diversity, and change. The debate is usually framed as monism versus pluralism. Monism claims that reality is, at bottom, one unified system. Pluralism claims that reality is not reducible to a single final principle without losing its most important features. James's interest in this debate is not purely abstract. He thinks metaphysical positions function like intellectual temperaments. They shape what we expect the world to be like, what we count as an explanation, and what we treat as a satisfying resolution of doubt. Monism tends to promise unity, finality, and an all-encompassing order. Pluralism tends to accept contingency, partial connection, and the idea that the world may not form one perfectly closed totality. To make James's approach clear, it helps to connect this to his pragmatic method. James's pragmatism asks what difference a belief makes in experience. So when someone asserts monism, James asks, what would follow if reality were ultimately one? Would it change how we interpret disagreements, tragedies, or moral conflict? Would it change what we expect from inquiry and explanation? And likewise for pluralism, if reality is genuinely many, what does that imply about knowledge, certainty, and the limits of system building? James is not satisfied with metaphysical labels that remain empty. He wants them to cash out into expectations. In James's terms, monism is often motivated by a desire for intellectual security. If reality is ultimately one, then in principle everything has its place in a single coherent scheme. Contradictions are only apparent. Differences are only surface level. From a monistic perspective, the deepest story is unity. James does not deny that unity exists in experience. There are patterns, regularities, and connections. But he doubts that unity is complete in the way monistic systems often suggest. He worries that monism can become too finished, too eager to close the book on the world. Pluralism, as James defends it, is not the claim that everything is disconnected. It is the claim that connections are real but partial, and that the world may contain genuine novelty and genuine divergence that cannot be dissolved into a single final formula. A pluralistic universe is one where the relations among things matter as much as the things themselves, and where the totality is not given in advance as a completed system. This fits naturally with James's radical empiricism, which insists that relations are part of experience and therefore part of reality, not merely inventions of thought. One reason James prefers pluralism is that it respects the texture of lived experience. Experience does not arrive as a perfectly unified whole. It arrives as a stream with multiple centers of interest, competing demands, and real tensions. We learn, we revise, we change course. We encounter disagreement that does not always resolve into harmony. Pluralism takes that seriously as a metaphysical clue. The world may not be a single finished block. It may be a field of partly connected processes where outcomes are not guaranteed in advance. This is also where James thinks monism can become verbally seductive. A monistic system can explain away any difficulty by moving it into a high-level unity. Conflict is only apparent, evil is only partial, difference is only a stage on the way to synthesis. James worries that this can turn metaphysics into a kind of rhetorical comfort rather than a disciplined interpretation of experience. The pragmatic question returns: what difference does this claim make? If it changes nothing in how we interpret events, how we inquire, or what we treat as possible, then perhaps it is not a meaningful explanation but a verbal gesture. Pluralism, in James's hands, also connects to ethics and responsibility. If the world is not guaranteed to resolve into a predetermined unity, then human choice matters in a more literal way. Effort matters. Outcomes are not simply manifestations of a completed whole. This does not mean chaos. It means genuine openness, the idea that the future is not fully settled, and that parts of reality may develop in ways that are not deducible from a single timeless principle. James's interest in will, effort, and genuine options fits naturally with this pluralistic metaphysics. A standard objection is that pluralism sounds intellectually messy. If reality is many, how can we have knowledge? How can we build science? James's reply is pragmatic and empiricist. Knowledge does not require an absolute final unity. Science works by identifying stable regularities and building models that predict and explain within domains. Pluralism does not deny regularity. It denies that regularity must be part of a single completed system. In fact, pluralism can make science more honest about its limits. Our theories are powerful, but they remain tools that may not capture the entire universe in one stroke. If you step back, you can see James's pluralism as a philosophical stance that protects the reality of difference without denying the reality of connection. It says the world is not a set of isolated fragments, but neither is it a perfectly unified whole that renders conflict illusory. It is a world of partial relations, real novelty, and unfinished development. For James, this is not merely a metaphysical preference. It is a reading of experience that stays accountable to what life feels like when it is actually lived. In the end, monism versus pluralism is not only a debate about the universe, it is a debate about the kind of explanation we demand. Monism often wants an explanation that closes the system. Pluralism accepts explanations that clarify without pretending to complete reality. James's position is that philosophy should not trade the complexity of experience for the comfort of a single word like the one. If unity is real, it must be discovered in the consequences of inquiry and in the relations we can actually trace, not assumed in advance as a final metaphysical guarantee.